Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Anna, Christy, Connie, Meg, and Nicolette. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes, fictional readings, and full books found nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's continue an epic journey to the top of the world with more from the North Pole, its discovery in 1909 under the auspices of the Peary Arctic Club by Robert E. Peary, with an introduction by Theodore Roosevelt and a foreword by Gilbert H. Grosvenor, Director and Editor, National Geographic Society. Originally published in 1910 by Frederick A. Stokes Company and Greenwood Press Publishers, New York. Let's pick up right where we left off at the beginning of Chapter 7, which, I'm sorry to say, has an unfortunate title. Let's begin. Chapter 7: Odd Customs of an Odd People. Hard as is the life of the Eskimo, his end is usually as rigorous. All his life he is engaged in constant warfare with the inhospitable elements of his country, and death, when it arrives, usually comes in some violent form. He dies, as a rule, in harness, drowned by the capsizing of his skin canoe, caught by the overturning of an iceberg, or crushed by a snowslide or a rock slide. It is seldom that an Eskimo lives to be more than 60 years of age. Strictly speaking, the Eskimos have no religion, in the sense in which we use the word, but they believe in the survival of the person after death, and they believe in spirits, especially evil spirits. It may be that the constantly recurring menaces of the dark, the bitter cold, the savage wind, and gnawing hunger have led them to people the air with invisible enemies. The beneficent spirits are those of their ancestors, while they have a whole legion of malevolent spirits, led by Tornasuk, the great devil himself. They are constantly trying to propitiate Tornasuk by incantations, and when they kill game, an offering is made to him. The devil is supposed to have a keen appreciation of these tidbits. On leaving a snow igloo, the Eskimos are careful to kick the front out of it, that the evil spirits may not find shelter there. And when they throw away a worn-out garment, it is never left intact, but is torn in such a way that the devil may not use it to warm himself. A comfortable devil is presumably more dangerous than a shivering one. Any sudden and unexplained barking or howling among the dogs indicates the invisible presence of Tornasook, and the men will run out and crack their whips or fire their rifles to scare away the invader. When on board the Roosevelt in winter quarters, I was suddenly aroused from sleep by the crack of rifles. I did not think there was a mutiny aboard, only that Tornasook had ridden by upon the wind. When the ice presses hard against the ship, an Eskimo will call on his dead father to push it away. When the wind blows with special violence, ancestors are again appealed to. There are no chiefs among these people, no men in authority, but there are medicine men who have some influence. The Angakok is generally not loved. He knows too many unpleasant things that are going to happen, so he says. The business of the Angakok is mainly singing incantations and going into trances, for he has no medicines. If a person is sick, he may prescribe abstinence from certain foods for a certain number of moons. For instance, the patient must not eat seal meat or deer meat, but only the flesh of the walrus. Their chanting is accompanied by contortions of the body and by sounds from a tambourine, made from the throat membrane of a walrus stretched on a bow of ivory or bone. The tapping of the rim with another piece of ivory or bone marks the time. Some women are supposed to possess the power of the Angakok. Once, years ago, the people got tired of an Angakok, one Koipado, who had predicted too many deaths, and they lured him out on a hunting expedition from which he never returned. But these executions for the peace of the community are rare. Their burial customs are rather interesting. When an Eskimo dies, there is no delay about removing the body. Just as soon as possible, it is wrapped, fully clothed, in the skins which form the bed, and some extra garments are added to ensure the comfort of the spirit. Then a strong line is tied round the body, and it is removed, always head first, from the tent or igloo, and dragged head first over the snow or ground to the nearest place where there are enough loose stones to cover it. The Eskimos do not like to touch a dead body, and it is therefore dragged as a sledge would be. Arrived at the place selected for the grave, they cover the corpse with loose stones to protect it from the dogs, foxes, and ravens, and the burial is complete. According to Eskimo ideas, the afterworld is a distinctly material place. If the deceased is a hunter, his sledge and kayak with his weapons and implements are placed close by, and his favorite dogs, harnessed and attached to the sledge, are killed so that they may accompany him on his journey into the unseen. If the deceased is a woman, her lamp and the little wooden frame on which she has dried the family boots and mittens are placed beside the grave. A little blubber is placed there too, and a few matches if they are available, so that the woman may light the lamp and do some cooking in transit. A cup or bowl is also provided, in which she may melt snow for water. Her needle, thimble, and other sewing things are placed with her in the grave. If a death occurs in a tent, the poles are removed, and the tent is left on the ground to rot or blow away. It is never used again. If the death occurs in an igloo, the structure is vacated and not used again for a long time. The relatives of the dead observe certain formalities in regard to food and clothing, and the name of the lost one is never mentioned. If any other members of the tribe have the same name, they must take another until an infant is born, to which the prescribed name can be given. This appears to remove the ban. In a country where the stars are visible for so many weeks at a time, it is not strange perhaps that they receive much attention from the natives. The Eskimos are astronomers. The principal constellations visible in northern latitudes are well known to them, and they have given them their own names and descriptions. In the Great Dipper they see a herd of celestial reindeer. The Pleiades are to the Eskimos a team of dogs pursuing a solitary polar bear. Gemini they describe as two stones in the entrance of an igloo. The moon and the sun represent to the Eskimo, as to some of our North American Indian tribes, a fleeing maiden and her pursuing admirer. The strength and capacity for enduring hardships exhibited by this people is extraordinary, and is not, I believe, exceeded by that shown by any other race now in existence. It is true that the average size of the Eskimo is, judged by our own standards, small, but I could give the names of several of them who stand 5 feet 10 inches and weigh 185 pounds. The popular idea that they are clumsily fashioned is not correct. That notion is merely another case of judging a man by the clothes he wears, and an Eskimo's garments are not precisely what we should call a fashionable cut. To my mind, the skin canoe of these northern aborigines is, with its hunting implements, one of the most complete and ingenious manifestations of intelligence to be found anywhere. Over a light framework, an almost infinite number of small pieces of wood, deftly lashed together with sealskin thongs, is stretched the tanned skin of seals, the seams being neatly sewed by the women, and then rendered watertight by an application of seal oil and soot from the native lamps. The result is a craft of great buoyancy, some grace, and especial fitness and effectiveness for the purposes for which it is intended, that is, to enable the hunter to creep softly and noiselessly upon seal, walrus, or white whale. This canoe, while varying somewhat with the size of the owner and maker, will average between 20 and 24 inches in width, by 16 or 18 feet in length. It carries one man only. It will scarcely be considered strange that I have grown to love this people, as well as to value their many admirable qualities, for it must be borne in mind that for nearly a quarter of a century they have been more thoroughly known to me than any other group of human beings in the world. The present generation has practically grown up under my personal observation. Every individual member of the tribe, man, woman, and child, is known to me by name and sight, as thoroughly as the patients of an old-fashioned family physician are known to him. And the knowledge of individuals gained in this intimate way has been priceless in the work of reaching the pole. Take, for example, the quartet of young Eskimos who formed a portion of the sledge party that finally reached the long-courted 90 North. The oldest of the four, Uta, is about 34 years of age. This young man is one of the sturdiest of the tribe. He stands about 5 feet 8 inches and is a fine hunter. When I first saw him, he was a young boy. Egingwa, another of the group, is about 26 years old, a big chap weighing about 175 pounds. Seaglue and Ukwea are about 24 and 20 respectively. Their capacities, peculiarities, and individual characteristics were perfectly known to me, and they were chosen out of the whole tribe for the final great effort because I knew them to be most perfectly adapted to the work in hand. Before taking up the story of our advance from Cape York, a word ought to be said about those remarkable creatures, the Eskimo dogs, for without their help, success could never have crowned the efforts of the expedition. They are sturdy, magnificent animals. There may be larger dogs than these. There may be handsomer dogs, but I doubt it. Other dogs may work as well or travel as fast and far when fully fed, but there is no dog in the world that can work so long in the lowest temperatures on practically nothing to eat. The male dogs average in weight from 80 to 100 pounds, though I had one which weighed 125 pounds. The females are somewhat smaller. Their special physical characteristics are a pointed muzzle, great breadth between the eyes, sharp pointed ears, very heavy coat underlaid with a thick, soft fur, powerful, heavy, muscled legs, and a bushy tail or brush similar to that of a fox. There is only one breed of Eskimo dogs, but they are variously marked and of different colors: black, white, gray, yellow, brown, and mottled. Some scientists believe that they are the direct descendants of the Arctic wolf. Yet as a rule, they are as affectionate and obedient to their masters as our own dogs at home. Their food is meat and meat only. That they cannot live on any other food I know, for I have made the experiment. For water they eat snow. The dogs are not housed at any season of the year, but summer and winter they are tied somewhere near the tent or igloo. They are never allowed to roam at large, lest they be lost. Sometimes a special pet, or a female that has young puppies, will be taken into the igloo for a time. But Eskimo puppies only a month old are so hardy that they can stand the severe winter weather. Chapter 8. Getting Recruits. When on August 1st the Roosevelt steamed out from Cape York, she had on board several Eskimo families, which we had picked up there and at Salvo Island. We also had about 100 dogs bought from the Eskimos. When I say bought, I do not mean paid for with money, as these people have no money and no unit of value. All exchange between them is based on the principle of pure barter. For instance, if one Eskimo has a deerskin which he does not need, and another has something else, they exchange. The Eskimos had dogs which we wanted, and we had many things which they wanted, such as lumber, knives and other cutlery, cooking utensils, ammunition, matches, etc. So, as the Yankees say, we traded. Steaming in a northwesterly course from Cape York, we passed the Crimson Cliffs, so named by Sir John Ross, the English explorer, in 1818. This vivid name was applied to the cliffs by reasons of the quantities of red snow which can be seen from a ship miles out at sea. The color is given to the permanent snow by the Protococcus nivalis, one of the lowest types of the single living protoplasmic cell. The nearly transparent gelatinous masses vary from a quarter-inch in diameter to the size of a pinhead, and they draw from the snow and the air the scanty nourishment which they require. Seen from a distance, the snow looks like blood. This red banner of the Arctic has greeted me on all my northern journeys. Sailing by these cliffs, which extend for 30 or 40 miles, my thoughts were busy with the work before us. First and most necessary of all was the task of gathering our Arctic personnel of Eskimos and dogs, already begun before we left Cape York. Our next stop after Cape York was on August 3rd, at North Star Bay, Umunwi as the natives call it, on Wolstenholme Sound. Here I found the Erik, which had become separated from us in Davis Strait several days before during heavy weather. At Umunwi, we took on 2 or 3 families of Eskimos and more dogs. Ukwea, one of my North Pole party, came aboard at this place. Sea Glue had joined us at Cape York. On the night of August 5th, a clear and sunshiny night between Hucklet and Northumberland Islands, I left the Roosevelt and transferred to the Erik, taking Matt Henson with me for a reconnaissance of the various Eskimo settlements on Inglefield Gulf and along the coast. This detour was for the purpose of picking up more Eskimos and dogs. The Roosevelt was sent ahead to Etah to get in shape for her coming battle royale with the ice in Kane Basin and the channels beyond. There was for me a strange mingling of pleasure and sadness in this gathering together of our helpers, for I felt that it was for the last time. The business consumed several days. I went first to Karna on the Red Cliff Peninsula, thence to Kangerdluksoa and Nunatoksoa near the head of the Gulf. Returning on our course, we came back to Karna, then went south to the neighborhood of the Itiblu Glacier, then northwest again by a devious course around the islands and the points to Kukan in Robertson Bay, then to Nurke, then on to Etah, where we joined the Roosevelt, having obtained all the Eskimos and dogs we needed, 246 of the latter to be exact. There was no intention of taking to the far north all the Eskimos taken on board the Erik and the Roosevelt, but if any family wanted transportation from one settlement to another, we were glad to accommodate them. It is to be doubted if anywhere on the waters of the 7 seas there was ever a more outlandishly picturesque vessel than ours at this time, a sort of free tourist steamship for traveling Eskimos, with their chattering children, barking dogs, and other goods and chattels. Imagine this man and dog bestrewn ship on a pleasant windless summer day in Whale Sound. A listless sea and the overarching sky are a vivid blue in the sunlight, more like a scene in the Bay of Naples than one in the Arctic. There is a crystalline clearness in the pure atmosphere that gives to all colors a brilliancy seen nowhere else. The glittering white of the icebergs with the blue veins running through them, the deep reds, warm grays, and rich browns of the cliffs, streaked here and there with the yellows of the sandstone. A little farther away sometimes the soft green grass of this little Arctic oasis, and on the distant horizon the steel blue of the great inland ice. When the little auks fly high against the sunlit sky, they appear like the leaves of a forest when the early frost has touched them, and the first gale of autumn carries them away, circling, drifting, eddying through the air. The desert of northern Africa may be as beautiful as Hitchens tells us. The jungles of Asia may wear as vivid coloring, but to my eyes, there is nothing so beautiful as the glittering Arctic on a sunlit summer day. On August 11th, the Erik reached Etah, where the Roosevelt was awaiting her. The dogs were landed on an island. The Roosevelt was washed. The boilers were blown down and filled with fresh water. The furnaces cleaned, and the cargo overhauled and restowed to put the vessel in fighting trim for her coming encounter with the ice. About 300 tons of coal were transferred from the Erik to the Roosevelt, and about 50 tons of walrus and whale meat. 50 tons of coal were cached at Etah for the Roosevelt's expected return the following year. 2 men, Boatswain Murphy and Pritchard the cabin boy, with full provisions for 2 years, were left in charge. Harry Whitney, a summer passenger on the Erik, who was ambitious to obtain musk oxen and polar bears, asked permission to remain with my 2 men at Etah. The permission was granted, and Mr. Whitney's belongings were landed. At Etah, Rudolph Frank, who had come north with Dr. Cook in 1907, came to me and asked permission to go home on the Erik. He showed me a letter from Dr. Cook directing him to go home this season on a whaler. An examination by Dr. Goodsell, my surgeon, showed that the man suffered from incipient scurvy and that he was in a serious mental state, so I had no alternative but to give him passage home on the Erik. Boatswain Murphy, whom I was to leave at Etah, was a thoroughly trustworthy man, and I gave him instructions to prevent the Eskimos from looting the supplies and equipment left there by Dr. Cook, and to be prepared to render Dr. Cook any assistance he might require when he returned, as I had no doubt he would, as soon as the ice froze over Smith Sound, presumably in January, so as to enable him to cross to Anarotok from Ellesmere Land, where I had no doubt he then was. On the Erik were 3 other passengers, Mr. C.C. Crafts, who had come north to take a series of magnetic observations for the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism of the Carnegie Institution in Washington, Mr. George S. Norton of New York, and Mr. Walter A. Larned, the tennis champion. The Roosevelt's carpenter Bob Bartlett of Newfoundland, not related to Captain Bob Bartlett, and a sailor named Johnson also went back on the Erik. The vessel was commanded by Captain Sam Bartlett, Captain Bob's uncle, who had been master of my own ship on several expeditions. At Etah we took on a few more Eskimos, including Utah and Agingwa, who were destined to be with me at the pole, and I left there all the remaining Eskimos that I did not wish to take with me to winter quarters in the north. We retained 49, 22 men, 17 women, 10 children, and 246 dogs, was loaded almost to the water's edge with the coal that had been crowded into her, the 70 tons of whale meat which we had bought in Labrador, and the meat and blubber of nearly 50 walruses. We parted company from the Erik and steamed north on the 18th of August, an intensely disagreeable day, with driving snow and rain and a cutting wind from the southeast which made the sea very rough. As the 2 ships separated, they signaled goodbye and good luck with the whistles, and our last link with civilization was broken. Since my return, I have been asked if I did not feel deep emotion on parting with my companions on the Erik, and I have truthfully replied that I did not. The reader must remember that this was my 8th expedition into the Arctic, and that I had parted with a supply ship many times before. Constant repetition will take the edge from the most dramatic experience. As we steamed north from the harbor of Etah, my thoughts were on the condition of the ice in Robeson Channel, and the ice in Robeson Channel is more dramatic than any parting, save from one's nearest and dearest, and I had left mine 3,000 miles below at Sydney. We had some 350 miles of almost solid ice to negotiate before we could reach our hoped-for winter quarters at Cape Sheridan. I knew that beyond Smith Sound, we might have to make our slow way rod by rod, and sometimes literally inch by inch, butting and ramming and dodging the mountainous ice. That if the Roosevelt survived, I should probably not have my clothes off or be able to snatch more than an hour or two of sleep at a time for 2 or 3 weeks. Should we lose our ship and have to make our way over the ice southward from anywhere below Lady Franklin Bay, or possibly beyond there, it was goodbye to my life's dream, and probably to some of my companions. Chapter 9, A Walrus Hunt, is something we're going to skip. If you'd like to read it for yourself, it's in the ebook. So let's quietly move on to Chapter 10, Knocking at the Gateway to the Pole. From Etah to Cape Sheridan. Imagine about 350 miles of almost solid ice. Ice of all shapes and sizes. Mountainous ice, flat ice, ragged and tortured ice. Ice that, for every foot of height revealed above the surface of the water, hides 7 feet below. A theater of action which for diabolic and titanic struggle makes Dante's frozen circle of the Inferno seem like a skating pond. Then imagine a little black ship, solid, sturdy, compact, strong and resistant as any vessel built by mortal hands can be, yet utterly insignificant in comparison with the white, cold adversary she must fight. And on this little ship are 69 human beings, men, women, and children, who have gone out into the crazy ice-tortured channel between Baffin Bay and the Polar Sea. Gone out to help prove the reality of a dream which has bewitched some of the most daring minds of the world for centuries. A will-o'-the-wisp in the pursuit of which men have frozen and starved and died. The music that ever sounded in our ears had for melody the howling of 246 wild dogs. For a bass accompaniment, the deep, low grumbling of the ice, surging around us with the impulse of the tides. And for punctuation, the shock and jar of our crashing assaults upon the floes. We steamed northward into the fog beyond Etah, Greenland, on the afternoon of August 18th, 1908. This was the beginning of the last stage of the Roosevelt's journey. All now on board would, if they lived, be with me until my return the following year. As an ungentle reminder of what was ahead of us, though going at half speed because of the fog, we struck a small berg a little way out from the harbor. Had the Roosevelt been an ordinary ship instead of the sturdy ice fighter that she is, my story might have ended right here. As it was, the shock of the impact jarred things considerably. But the berg suffered more than the ship, which only shook herself like a dog coming out of the water, and with the main mass of the berg swaying heavily on one side from the blow we had given it, and a large fragment we had broken off churning the water on the other side, the Roosevelt scraped between them and went on. This little incident made a strong impression on the new members of my party, and I did not think it necessary to tell them that it was only a mosquito bite to the crunching and grinding between the jaws of the heavier ice that was in store for us a little farther on. We were working in a northwesterly direction toward the Ellesmere land side, and headed for Cape Sabine of terrible memories. As we steamed on, the ice became thicker, and we had to turn south to get out of the way of it, worming our course among the loose floes. The Roosevelt avoided the heavier ice, but the lighter pack she shoved aside without much difficulty. South of Brevard Island, we were fortunate in finding a strip of open water and steamed northward again, keeping close to the shore. It must be remembered that from Etah to Cape Sheridan, for the greater part of the course, the shores on either side are clearly visible. On the east, the Greenland coast. On the west, the coast of Ellesmere Land and Grant Land. At Cape Beechey, the narrowest and most dangerous part, the channel is only 11 miles wide, and when the air is clear, it almost seems as if a rifle bullet might be fired from one side to the other. These waters, save in exceptional seasons, are filled with the heaviest kind of ice, which is constantly floating southward from the polar sea toward Baffin Bay. Whether this channel was carved in the solid land by the force of pre-Adamite glaciers, or whether it is a titanic cleft formed by the breaking off of Greenland from Grant Land, is a question still undetermined by geologists. But for difficulty and danger, there is no place to compare with it in the whole Arctic region. It is hard for a layman to understand the character of the ice through which the Roosevelt fought her way. Most persons imagine that the ice of the Arctic regions has been formed by direct freezing of the seawater. But in the summertime, very little of the floating ice is of that character. It is composed of huge sheets broken off from the glacial fringe of North Grant Land, broken up by contact with other floes and with the land, and driven south under the impetus of the violent flood tides. It is not unusual to see there ice between 80 and 100 feet thick. As 7/8 of these heavy floes are underwater, one does not realize how thick they are until one sees where a huge mass, by the pressure of the pack behind it, has been driven upon the shore, and stands there high and dry, 80 or 100 feet above the water, like a silver castle guarding the shore of this exaggerated and ice-clogged Rhine. The navigation of the narrow and ice-encumbered channels between Etah and Cape Sheridan was long considered an utter impossibility, and only 4 ships besides the Roosevelt have succeeded in accomplishing any considerable portion of it. Of these 4 ships, 1, the Polaris, was lost. 3, the Alert, the Discovery, and the Proteus, made the voyage up and back in safety. But one of those, the Proteus, was lost in an attempt to repeat the dash. The Roosevelt had on the expedition of 1905-06 made the voyage up and back, though she was badly smashed on the return. Going north, the Roosevelt of necessity followed the coast a portion of the way, as only close to the shore could any water be found which would enable the ship to advance. With the shore ice on one side and the moving central pack on the other, the changing tides were almost certain to give us an occasional opportunity to steam ahead. This channel is the meeting place between the tides coming from Baffin Bay on the south and from Lincoln Sea on the north, the actual point of meeting being about Cape Fraser. South of that point, the flood tide runs north, and north of it, the flood tide runs south. One may judge of the force of these tides from the fact that on the shores of the Polar Sea, the mean rise is only a little over a foot, while in the narrowest part of the channel, the tide rises and falls 12 or 14 feet. As a rule, looking across the channel, there seems to be no water, nothing but uneven and tortured ice. When the tide is at an ebb, the ship follows the narrow crack of water between the shore and the moving pack of the center, driving ahead with all her force. Then, when the flood tide begins to rush violently southward, the ship must hurry to shelter in some niche of the shore ice or behind some point of rock to save herself from destruction or being driven south again. This method of navigation, however, is one of constant hazard, as it keeps the vessel between the immovable rocks and the heavy and rapidly drifting ice, with the ever-present possibility of being crushed between the two. My knowledge of the ice conditions of these channels and their navigation was absolutely my own, gained in former years of traveling along the shores and studying them for this very purpose. On my various expeditions, I had walked every foot of the coastline, from Peary Harbor on the south to Cape Joseph Henry on the north, from 3 to 8 times. I knew every indentation of that coast, every possible shelter for a ship, every place where icebergs usually grounded, and the places where the tide ran strongest, as accurately as a tugboat captain in New York Harbor knows the piers of the North River waterfront. When Bartlett was in doubt as to making a risky run, with the chance of not finding shelter for the ship, I could usually say to him, "At such and such a place so far from here is a little niche behind the delta of a stream, where we can drive the Roosevelt in if necessary." Or, "Here icebergs are almost invariably grounded, and we can find shelter behind them." Or, "Here is a place absolutely to be shunned, for the floes pile up here at the slightest provocation in a way that would destroy any ship afloat." It was this detailed knowledge of every foot of the Ellesmere Land and Grant Land coasts, combined with Bartlett's energy and ice experience, that enabled us to pass 4 times between this Arctic Scylla and Charybdis. The fog lifted about 9 o'clock the first night out. The sun peeped through the clouds, and as we passed Peary Harbor on the Ellesmere Land side, we saw, sharply outlined against the snow, the house where I wintered in 1901 to 1902. A flood of memories rushed over me at sight of the place. It was in Peary Harbor that Mrs. Peary and my little daughter had waited for me, on the Windward, from September 1900 to May 1901, the ice being so heavy that year that the ship could neither reach Fort Conger, 300 miles beyond where I was, nor regain the open water to the south and return home. That was the spring when I had been obliged to turn back at Lincoln Bay, because the exhaustion of my Eskimos and dogs made a dash for the pole impossible. It was at Peary Harbor that I had rejoined my family. It was at Peary Harbor that I had parted from them, determined to make one fight more to reach the goal. One fight more, I said in 1902, but I had only reached 84 degrees 17 minutes. One fight more, I had said in 1905, but I had only reached 87 degrees 6 minutes. And now at Peary Harbor again, on August 18th, 1908, it was still one fight more. Only this time I knew it was the last in truth, whatever the result. At 10 o'clock that night, we were steaming past the desolate, windswept and ice-ground rocks of Cape Sabine, the spot that marks one of the most somber chapters in Arctic history, where Greeley's ill-fated party slowly starved to death in 1884, 7 survivors only being rescued out of a party of 24. The ruins of the rude stone hut built by these men for shelter during the last year of their lives can still be seen on the bleak northern shore of Cape Sabine, only 2 or 3 miles from the extreme point. It is doubtful if a more desolate and unsheltered location for a camp could be found anywhere in the Arctic regions, fully exposed to the biting winds from the north, cut off by the rocks back of it from the rays of the southern sun, and besieged by the ice pack surging down from Kane Basin in the north. I first saw the place in August 1896 in a blinding snowstorm, so thick that it was impossible to see more than a few yards in any direction. The impressions of that day will never be forgotten. The pity and the sickening sense of horror. The saddest part of the whole story for me was the knowledge that the catastrophe was unnecessary, that it might have been avoided. My men and I have been cold and have been near to starvation in the Arctic when cold and hunger were inevitable. But the horrors of Cape Sabine were not inevitable. They are a blot upon the record of American Arctic exploration. From Cape Sabine north, there was so much open water that we thought of setting the lug sail before the southerly wind, but a little later the appearance of ice to the north caused us to change our minds. About 60 miles north of Etah, we came to a dead stop in the ice pack off Victoria Head. There we lay for hours. But the time was not altogether wasted, for we filled our tanks with ice from a floe. In the afternoon of the second day out, the wind came on strong from the south, and we slowly drifted northward with the ice. After some hours, the wind began to form pools of open water through the pack, and we steamed westward toward the land, with the spray flying clear across the decks. An Eskimo declared that this was the devil spitting at us. After a few miles, we ran into denser ice and stopped again. Dr. Goodsell, Macmillan, and Borup were busy storing food and medical supplies in the boats to be ready for an emergency. Had the Roosevelt been crushed by the ice or sunk, we could have lowered the boats at a moment's notice, fitted and equipped for a voyage, and retreated to the Eskimo country, thence back to civilization on some whaler, or in a ship which would have been sent up with coal the following year by the Peary Arctic Club, though that, of course, would have meant the failure of the expedition. In each of the 6 whaleboats were placed a case containing 12 6-pound tins of pemmican, the compressed meat food used on Arctic expeditions. 2 25-pound tins of biscuit, 2 5-pound tins of sugar, a few pounds of coffee, and several cans of condensed milk, an oil stove and 5 one-gallon tins of oil, a rifle with 100 rounds of ammunition, and a shotgun with 50 rounds, matches, a hatchet, knives, a can opener, salt, needles and thread, and the following medical supplies: catgut and needles, bandages and cotton, quinine, tannic acid astringent, gauze, plaster surgical liniment, boracic acid, and dusting powder. The boats were swung at the davits with a full complement of oars, mast, sails, etc., and the emergency outfit above described would have fitted them for a voyage of a week or 10 days. On leaving Etah, the essential items of supplies, such as tea, coffee, sugar, oil, pemmican, and biscuit, had been stowed on deck, close to the rail on both sides, ready instantly to be thrown over the rail onto the ice in case the ship should be crushed. Every person on board, both the men of the ship and the Eskimos, was ready with a little bundle packed to get right over the side at a moment's notice, after lowering the boats and throwing onto the ice the essential supplies stowed near the ship's rail. Nobody thought of undressing regularly, and the bathtub in my cabin might as well have been a trunk for all the time I dared to spend in it between Etah and Cape Sheridan. And on that slightly stinky note, and the end of Chapter 10, I think we'll end this evening's reading. From the North Pole, its discovery in 1909 under the auspices of the Peary Arctic Club. It sounds like we're just getting to the adventurous part, but we'll leave that for next time. I hope you enjoyed that. If you'd like to read this work for yourself and see the photographs included in it, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.